Software Restriction Policies, or SRP, is a technology available with Windows 7 and 2008 Server. It allows controlling software and applications based on path rules, hash rules, or certificate rules. Path rules in SRP define a particular path and file name that can be allowed or disallowed in group policy. Unlike hash rules, path rules can be circumvented by moving files to alternate locations or renaming them. Hash rules in SRP generate a unique hash value for each file they are allowing or disallowing. They are more difficult to circumvent since simply moving the file or renaming it won't change its hash value. Certificate rules are based on certificates that can be downloaded or generated with a certificate authority such as certificate services. If the client possesses a particular certificate, it may then run a particular application. AppLocker is a new software and application control technology that is available in Windows 7 Ultimate, Windows 7 Enterprise, and 2008 Server R2 products. It is somewhat like Software Restriction Policies, or SRP. However, AppLocker offers some enhancements compared to the SRP technology that is currently being used in Active Directory. Since SRP builds software control policies primarily based on hash values, it can be difficult to manage and maintain in dynamic environments where many programs are frequently installed, uninstalled, and updated. Every time a program is updated, a new hash rule must be configured for it. Rather than SRP's hash values, AppLocker can use an application's digital signature when building rules and policies. Therefore, rather than creating a new hash for each update of an application, an administrator can simply specify a rule allowing all updates to a particular application as long as it is signed by its creator or developer. In this way, with AppLocker, each update is installed automatically without requiring intervention from an administrator to generate a new hash value, as would be required with SRP. AppLocker works by creating rules for executable files, scripts, and DLLs. These rules are implemented in policies called rule collections that can be assigned to users and groups within Active Directory. Within AppLocker, there are two primary rule actions, allow and deny. Exceptions to these two rule actions can be specified. Choosing allow blocks the execution of any programs that are not on the allowed list. Choosing deny is the opposite. It allows the execution of any programs not on the denied list. Exception rules allow the exclusion of files that would otherwise be under allow or deny rules. Today we're taking a look at SRP, or Software Restriction Policies, and AppLocker, and the similarities and differences between the two of them. So right now I'm on a 2008 server. It's a domain controller, and it's administering the Autobots domain. If I go to Administrative Tools and Group Policy Management, just want to point out some of the differences here. We'll take a look at managing group policy on the domain controller itself, 2008 server, and we'll also take a look at some of the differences when you manage group policy on a Windows 7 workstation with the Remote Administration Tools package installed. So in this case, I'd want to go to Group Policy Objects, and I could right-click and make a new Group Policy Object here if I wanted. But as sort of a shortcut or to save time, I'm just going to go ahead and create one right here at the top level of the domain. And just realize that anything that we do here affects everybody in the domain, and that's what I want. But if that were not the case, then I'd want to do it maybe at an organizational unit level, or just be aware of how inheritance affects you. Remember that where you place a GPO, where you link a GPO, is completely dependent upon the parents above it, if enforce or no override has been enabled, and that inheritance will propagate all those changes down to the children below it. So right click, and if I said create a GPO in this domain and link it here, and I could call this one software control. Okay, so this is software control. Notice it's warning me, you selected a link to a group policy object except for changes to link properties. Changes you make here are global to the GPO and will impact all other locations where this GPO is linked. Okay, we know that. So now if I right click and edit, just want to show you some of the subtle differences here. So if I go under computer configuration, and we want to go policies, Windows settings, security settings, and if I open up this node here, let me pull this over to the right so I'm in this column. And notice that we have SRP, or Software Restriction Policies, available to us here. And in this case, none defined, but we could create a new Software Restriction Policy rule. Alright, so we'll come back and take a look at that. But just bear in mind, this is on the 2008 server domain controller. Now notice that there's no AppLocker available here. Alright, so in this case we want to be on Windows 7 Enterprise or Windows 7 Ultimate, so we'll go hop on a Windows 7 Ultimate, and in addition to SRP you'll also see AppLocker, but on the 2008 server installation I have, notice that it doesn't show up. Let's hop on over to Windows 7 Ultimate with the Administrative Toolpack installed. Okay, now we're on a Windows 7 Ultimate workstation that's a member of the domain, but it's got the administration, remote administration tool package installed. So if I go to Administration Tools, just as if I were on a 2008 server domain controller, I have, Active Directory users and computers, sites and services, and so forth. And if you don't have that, you can download that for any Windows 7 Enterprise or Ultimate workstation from Microsoft's website. So I'm going to open up Group Policy Management. And I want to go here and open this node. And notice that here is the GPO that we created and linked while we were on the 2008 server. So it's propagated and I can access it here. And again, if I wanted to, I could right click and I could link GPOs, create GPOs. I could come over here, manage different for us, different domains, things like that. But in this case, let's open our GPO for editing. And I'm going to go Policies and Windows Settings, just like we did before on the 2008 server. Only you'll notice this looks a bit different. Security Settings, and pull this down here. And now, if you take a look, yes, we have software restriction policies right here. We still need to define, we haven't defined any rules or anything or set up software restriction policies yet, but also notice that we have application control policies down here. Alright? And this is what we'll kind of be exploring, the differences between these two. So if I open this, notice there's AppLocker. And then here would be the rules and things in AppLocker. Let's examine software restriction policies. So let's first take a look at software restriction policies, since that's been around a bit longer than AppLocker. AppLocker is kind of the new kid on the block, with some improvements here, but software restriction policies is still available and still quite effective in Active Directory. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on the policy node and say New Software Restriction Policies. Okay, and when I do that, notice that I get security levels and additional rules. So let's just explore these, and I will enlarge this somewhat so we can see it. We have disallowed, which simply means you can't run the application at all. Basic user, and in this case, if you want to look at the defaults, allows programs to execute as a user that does not have administrator access rights but can still access resources accessible by normal users. So in our case, that'd be like domain users. And then unrestricted, and in this case, software access rights are determined by the access rights of the user. So it would be, whatever permissions they had in group policy or whatever they were configured as far as access control entries on the DACL of some object or folder. So if I wanted to block something, it would be disallowed. And notice, I'll double click, or you can right click and say properties. You can choose to, set any of these as the default. Okay, so if I wanted to, I could set disallowed as the default. All right, and then down here under additional rules, there's a few built-in rules here, and this is unrestricted. And notice the path, system root, the C drive, and program files. By default, we probably don't want to block anything there. So they exist there, and they're unrestricted. Now what I can do is I can add an additional rule. And we could, notice the options, I could choose a new certificate rule if I had issued a certificate via certificate services, and we could use that to control access to whether or not someone could run or not run or install an application. And then the two we're going to look at right now are hash rules and path rules. And one of the more simplistic ones, I guess, would be a path rule, in which case that just specifies the path to something. So in this case, we would just type a path here of a program that we didn't want to run. So let's say I didn't want to run Notepad. Alright, I could do, let me do, I believe in Windows 7 that's in the Windows folder. Yeah, Notepad exe. Okay, and it will be disallowed, and notice I could choose basic user, unrestricted, but in this case, yeah, I want disallowed. Alright, so if I did that, now remember, in the past videos where we've been dealing with group policy, when you make a group policy change, oftentimes you need to refresh it. And so I'm opening a command prompt, and I'm just going to type GP update. I could just enter that, or you can do GP update with the force option, your choice. And that will go out there and update group policy. Okay, and so now that path rule should be restricted. So if I go to this path, C Windows Notepad exe, let's try it. I'm going to open my computer. I'm going to go here on my C drive, and I'm going to go into the Windows subdirectory, and I'm going to highlight and hit N to go down to the ends, and there's Notepad, and I'm going to try to open it. Notice it tells me this program is blocked by group policy. For more information, contact your system administrator. Right, and that's just an example of a path rule, and that can be effective, but it's not as sophisticated as a hash rule. And the thing is, a lot of times with a lot of programs, if I were to simply move it outside of the path, I'd be able to run it. That's sort of the problem with a path rule. Okay, so you know, in other words, if I were to move it to a different location, then I could defeat the security, so to speak. But a hash rule is a bit more sophisticated. Hash rule can be generated, basically, and it's based on several things, the algorithms inside the file and its size and signature and things like that. But it's more difficult to fool group policy if you generate a hash rule than it would be with just a simple path rule. And again, let me just demonstrate. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this rule just to show you what will happen. And I'm just going to make a quick little VB script, and I'll show you. Alright, but remember, I need to do GP update again. I'm just going to hit the up arrow. I need to refresh the policy just to show you, once I refresh the policy after each change, that group policy is updated. And now that I've removed that software restriction policy, I should now be able to run Notepad. So I'm going to pull this up here, and I'm going to click on Notepad, and it opens right up, no problem. Alright, so we verified that the path rule works, but maybe is there a better way of implementing the path rule? So I'm going to create just a very simple VB script file. I'm going to say new and text document, and I'm going to call this message, and give it the .vbs extension, right, for a VB script. And yes. Okay, and now it exists. And I'm going to edit it, and I'm just going to type in a very simple visual or VB script command, msg box, and I'm just going to call it banana. Little pop-up box. We'll say banana. So if I click on this now, a little window pops up, says banana. Alright, so we can verify that it's functioning, that it's working. So again, let's try this again, right? Let's go, and I'm going to do additional rules, new, and I'm going to say new path rule, and this time it's going to be C : Windows /. Is that an I or an L? I can't really see there. Okay, alright, and then message.vbs, right? So a path rule that matches that file will disallow it, and we'll go ahead and put that rule in there. Alright, so it's C Windows message VBS. And if I do that, now remember, I need to update group policy when I make a change. And it depends on the replication cycle and how often group policy is transmitted. Remember, it uses the sysfall folder and certain shares and things, but you'll need to use this tool, and it also depends on whether you're using it on Windows 7 versus using it on 2008, when the changes are propagated, and also, as you saw, even what you have access to. On 2008, I didn't even have AppLocker. I just had software restriction policies. Here on Windows 7, with the remote administration tool package, I have both. I have SRP and I have AppLocker. So anyway, this is now implemented, so let's test the path rule. So if I click on it, notice it tells me execution of the Windows script has failed. This program is blocked by group policy. For more information, contact your system administrator. Okay, so it works, does what it should do, and it's some security, but what happens if I do this? That's the path. Look, if I click up here, see, it's the path in C : /Windows message.vbs. So if I right click and I copy it and I paste it and move it over to my desktop though, or put it in a different location, the C drive, what happens if I click on it now? It works, see? So that security is fairly easy to defeat, And a path rule, being kind of simplistic, is not your tightest security. It's pretty easy to defeat it just by renaming the file or moving it to a different path on the system. Alright. Now what about a hash rule? Go ahead and get rid of that. Extra copy there. What about a hash rule? What can we do there? So I'm going to get rid of this. Once again. And I'm going to kind of reset everything. I'll update my group policy. Okay, now that I've updated the group policy, this time instead of a path rule, let's do a hash rule. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to say new hash rule, and this time I'm going to go browse and find that file. And I'm going to go into Windows, and I'll just hit M to scroll through the M's down to message VBS, and I'll open that up. And it's 17 bytes, 9/25/2011, 4:31, 40 a.m. Yes, boy, I've been up late. And I want to choose disallowed and generate a hash for that file. This is a little bit more sophisticated than a path rule and a little bit more difficult to defeat. I guess the only downside or negative to this is if you imagine this were an application that required frequent updating. I'd have to sit there and generate a new hash every single time, and that was sort of one of the reasons why Microsoft introduced AppLocker. It was a way to use digital signatures instead of hash values. And with a digital signature, I can say, hey, I trust this program, and every single update in the future that vendor or developer will release for that program without having to generate a new hash rule. Whereas under software restriction policies, which we're using right now, I would have to make a new hash rule every time. Nothing wrong with that. It works just fine, but maybe it's not as convenient as AppLocker. But it's nice to have both options, maybe for backwards compatibility issues and things. As you saw, AppLocker was not available on my version of 2008 server in this domain, and yet here in Windows 7 it is. It's the same group policy, the same Active Directory, the same domain, but just different options because of differences in the operating systems. So at least with this software restriction policies, it's available everywhere regardless of the service packs and things that I have installed or what updates I have installed. It's there in 2008 and Windows 7. Anyway, I guess I got off on a tangent. So we've created this hash rule now, okay? And let's go ahead and update our policy. Okay, and the group policy is updated successfully, and now watch what happens. So if I'm in the folder, true, this is where I generated the hash. If I try to run it, what happens? Hey, this program is blocked by group policy, can't run it. Now what if I try that same technique that I tried earlier to defeat the security? So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to copy it. I'm going to move it to a different location this time. I'll put it on my desktop, and now if I try to run it again, look, same thing. Program is blocked by group policy. So you can see that I can't just change the path or the name and defeat the security. In this case, a hash value is definitely more secure and more sophisticated as far as a means of security and securing that file than a path option would be. Alright, and once again I'm just going to get rid of this rule. Okay, so I'll get rid of the hash rule, and I'm going to hit the up arrow and update my group policy on the Windows 7 workstation. Okay, and now once again if I go back here, it runs fine now, I get banana, and here it runs fine, I get banana. So just trying to demonstrate or illustrate the difference between a path rule versus a hash rule. Now let's take a peek at AppLocker. Note, if you have problems setting up AppLocker, try starting the application ID service and rebooting. Open a command prompt as administrator and type net start app ID. So I'm going to open up AppLocker, and notice that there are three categories by default. Executable rules, which governs binary executables, Windows installer files, which governs MSI files, and script rules, which would govern things like the VBS script we just created in the previous example. So one of the first things you want to do when you utilize AppLocker is create your default rules. So I'm going to select all three categories, right click, and say create default rules. And this will just set up default rules that allow people to do everything, which is, well, that was the default condition anyway. It's kind of an easy way. I guess it's sort of the opposite of least privilege, but it's an easy way to make sure that everybody can run the programs they need to run, so that you're only restricting the things that you want to restrict. Otherwise, there might be a lot of programs that people all of a sudden can't run. So notice when I did that in all three categories, that it's going to allow everyone to run programs, in this case binary executables, in the program files folder and the Windows folder. And in this case, administrators can run all files anywhere. So if we wanted to, we could add exceptions to any of these rules. And we could also go here and we could right click and we could create a new rule. So let's look at an exception first, and then we'll look at creating a new rule. Always an exception. Now that we've created our default rules, what if we wanted to add an exception? And in this case, why don't we pick all files located in the Windows folder. So by default, anybody can run anything located there, regedit, notepad, whatever. So I'm going to double click, or I could right click and say properties, your preference. Notice that I have several tabs here. I could allow or deny, so I could choose my default, or I could select a user or group here and specify a certain user or group that rule applied to. In this case, it applies to everyone, so it's sort of it's our default rule. I could go here and I could select path and select the file or folder path that this rule should affect. In this case, it's the Windows directory. That's the system environment variable for C:\Windows, if that's typically where you have it installed. I want to go to the third tab. This is when we're interested in exceptions, and I could choose publisher, path, and file hash. And the enhanced capability that AppLocker offers over SRP, software restriction policies, is this option here, publisher. And this is that if I had an application with a digital signature, let's say Adobe Reader or Adobe Photoshop or something like that, then I could specify or add that digital signature, and I could go ahead and OK any updates or upgrades to that application, as many as could be proven to come from the original developer or the publisher, because they had a digital signature affixed or applied to them. Right, so that makes this tool different from software restriction policies, or one of the significant differences or improvements in that. So I wouldn't have to sit there and generate a new hash rule every single time an update came out, if and only if that application had a digital signature. Otherwise, if I'm using something without a digital signature, like in this instance, we'll use Notepad as a built-in file and maybe the VBS script we created in the previous example, then I'd still have to choose one of these two, in which case it pretty much works like software restriction policies. So just be aware that this is sort of the awesomeness of this new tool, is this feature here, the ability to utilize a publisher and therefore a digital signature on an application, such that you would not have to sit there and generate new hash rules to block or to allow every single new update that might come out for that specific application. But just to verify that it works in the same fashion, let's use the path rule here. So I'm going to add a path exception, and I'm going to go ahead and click add, and let me drag this over here. So we add the path C:\Windows, and we'll do Notepad.exe like in our previous example, and click OK or hit enter. So notice it shows up, there's the path. Okay, and I'm going to click on OK. Again, let's say we want to check our path rule. So if I go here, right click properties, or double click, your preference, and I go to the exceptions tab, notice there is our path rule. So if I wanted to, I could add another. And let's do we'll do C Windows regedit.exe. Alright, so I'll add two path rules there. So in this case, I'm allowing all applications to run from within the Windows folder, with the exception, on the exceptions tab, of these two programs, Notepad.exe and regedit.exe. And notice that by default, I'm allowing administrators to run all files in this example.